The book is titled Full Circle, The Journey Home. This is dedicated to my parents, Basil and Jean, whose stewardship shielded us from the turbulence of these times, and although we were not well off, made us feel as though we were. This is the prologue. It was a time of relative peace. The Great War had ended over a decade now, and Europe was still in the throes of euphoria. Gone were the dowdy days of want, fear, and uncertainty. Everywhere life was brimming with the promise of renewal and rebirth. The Marshall Plan was indeed bearing fruit. Peace, it seemed, had brought with it an exuberance of glamour. From the silver screen to the average working family, the quest for a better life was now a near reality, and the race for things material had begun. Amidst the din and clatter that heralded the greatest economic recovery of the 20th century, the shape of new cities were taking form, and with it, the murmur of an imperceptible shift in our value system barely made its presence felt. This change would in a few years hence grow and mature into something quite different from the carefree, trusting, polite, and genteel society of these times. Could we have envisioned the future while standing at this precipice? What could or would we have done differently? Or are we satisfied with the outcome to not have wanted any change at all? The events at Malta played this part too. With the signing of the armistice, new alliances were forged, and the great empire found itself emasculated, an empire no more. Such were the fortunes of war. This then was the reality, a world caught up in the pursuit of great wealth and power. America flexed, Great Britain rested, and the Soviets needed to prove its prowess. And South America, that enclave with a reputation of pure joy and harmony, found itself at the mercy of political shenanigans, intent on acquiring power and wealth, come what may. The legacy of Juan and Eva Perón reverberated within Argentina, with Peronism being proscribed on and off again, amidst repressive revolving military juntas. This created a time of great agitation and uncertainty for the average citizen. Brazil, with its growing economy, was not spared, and shared a similar fate, with multiple military coups and suppression of dissent being the order of the day. So too was Venezuela. Even with the highest gross domestic product in South America at the time, and a dalliance with democracy, the situation for ordinary people all across the continent was, to say the least, rather perilous. With the three largest economies of South America in such a state, the smaller surrounding nations fared perhaps even worse, with repression and exceptionally brutal crackdowns on any form of opposition being daily occurrences. The Cold War was in its infancy, and even more repression was in store on a dazed and weary populace. Untouched by these events were two tiny countries and one overseas possession on the continent, the Guyanas. French Guiana, being a possession of France, was more aligned with Europe and had little contact with neighboring states. Dutch Guiana, called Suriname, was newly given limited self-government from the Netherlands. It was occupied by the United States during the war, chiefly for the protection of the bauxite industry, and by an agreement with the Netherlands government in exile, and was now enjoying the fruits of being a colony of the benevolent Netherlands. Contact with neighboring states was at best sparse. British Guiana, being the third smallest state and the only English-speaking country in South America, was mostly aligned with the Caribbean on a cultural, social, and economic level, and therefore had minimal contact with the rest of the continent. During these times, British Guiana appeared to be a paradise of peace and harmony, with 6 different races living peaceably together. From the spectacular colonial buildings surrounded by palm and coconut trees, were numerous multicolored flowering plants and trees with exotic names like Rain Tree, Mami, the Flamboyant, Whitey, and Stinking Toe, all flourished in abundance in the capital city of Georgetown. To the neatly laid out streets in grid-like formation, with tree-lined avenues to the canals that crisscross the city with its cokers or sluice gates for protection, which were built by the Dutch to avoid flooding due to the city being below sea level, to the white-painted colonial buildings and trees that lined the streets and canals on either side, where even the bottom half of these trees were painted a dazzling white, earning Georgetown the nickname the Garden City. To the multicolored attire and profusion of intricate gold jewelry of every elaborate description, worn chiefly by the women of East Indian origin, to the long flowing colorful dresses and elaborate hats or other spectacularly wrapped headgear of the African women, with the few Amerindians, Chinese, Portuguese, and other inhabitants of this city, all going about their business, either plying their trade in Stabroek Market, or Big Market as it was colloquially called, Georgetown's landmark structure with its old clock-faced tower, built by the Dutch around 1784 when the city was named Stabroek, or going to work elsewhere as clerks, bookkeepers, or other employment. Some riding bicycles or motorcycles, some walking, some with huge loads of produce on their heads, and some with colorful umbrellas to shelter from the hot tropical sun. To the donkey and horse-drawn vehicles carrying loads of greenheart wood or other goods, sharing the roads with the cyclists, motorcyclists, and cars, to the children of all races, playing, walking, or just trying to hitch a ride on one of the many horse-drawn carts, without, of course, being observed by the drivers, to the men sitting under the shade of a flamboyant tree, playing dominoes or cards. All these gave credence to an idyllic tropical existence, or so it seemed. Beyond this periphery was a very subtle class-based society amongst the native races, but not so subtle when it involved British citizens who were by and large the masters of the very best that the colony had to offer. Senior jobs in the national industries from rice production to the sugar industry, which was controlled by the Bookers-McConnell group of companies, were reserved for British citizens. Being a colony, all governing decisions were made by the colonial power. Although some domestic situations and grievances would entail consultations with the natives, they were for the most part just a charade, as ultimately only the British had the education and knowledge to know what was best for these lowly natives, or so they believed. Meanwhile, the natives were now inevitably discovering that if they were to have any significant improvement in their existence, then they must have a more meaningful input and control into the future course of their lives, together with that of their country, and so began to agitate for self-government. As a result of this quest, many civil and labor disturbances took place during this time, which forced the colonial power to appoint the Moynier Commission, tasked with investigating the causes of these disturbances and to furnish recommendations.